Welcome once again to Focus on Art. I'm your host, Barbara Cohenauer, and delighted you're with us again this evening. We're at Indian Territory Gallery in Sapulpa. The owner, Shirley Wells, has invited a few of her favorite Native American artists in for the morning, and we'll have a conversation with a couple of those. I'm going to start and talk first to Paul Pasatoba. Paul, welcome to Focus on Art.
Thank you.
Paul's not only a very talented flute player, he's also a very talented visual artist. Paul, I'd like to begin and talk to artists a little bit about where they came from, how they got to be a painter and that kind of thing.
Well, I'm from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and that's where I started as a young boy doing Indian art. And later I met the famous Indian artist A.C. Blue Eagle, who encouraged me to pursue Indian art as a career. He liked what I was doing and my colors and so forth. And so with that encouragement, I started painting that more so, and I'm still at it ever since.
Great. Paul, your dad was an artist too. Let's talk about your father for a moment.
Well, he was naturally gifted with being able to draw people. He could talk to someone in town and then go home and draw their picture.
That's an amazing talent. Did your father create works of art to sell, or did he do his artwork just for his own personal pleasure?
He didn't. He never used his art as a career, just for his own personal use, that's all.
Okay, and so the talent passes from your father to you, but that's not the end of the line either.
No, my brother, Lauren, is a well-known painter, and my son Mike is becoming well-known as a painter.
I think that's great. It's wonderful to have things you can pass down to your kids in the way of talent and so forth.
Yeah.
And your son is also an actor.
Yes, he's starting to be, and I hope that he gets some good breaks along the line.
Well, Paul, let's talk about your paintings. Do you consider yourself a traditional Indian artist?
Well, it's Indian art started out flat, 2 and 3 dimensional, and back in the 50s it started changing, whereby most of the artists just did more or less what they wanted to do, and that way it changed to what it is today. There was even some abstract and some non-objective paintings, and contemporary art took on a different new look. There's more realism than otherwise.
But I would say by looking at yours, that yours is more a combination of traditional elements mixed with kind of new elements.
That's what I try to show.
Okay, well, I certainly think that's a wonderful place to be here in 1990. Ties to your historic past, and yet being who you are today, a 20th century man. Well, let's begin and talk about the painting that's sitting to your left.
This was called Osage Chief, and it shows the Mark of Honor tattoo that only a few of them had, and happy to say that my grandfather had one. It represented the sacred pipes, and they say when these men had this mark tattooed on their chest that they didn't sleep on the ground in respect to the pipes. So that's about what I know about that, and you know, in a lot of places it's sort of a secret.
I see.
It's something that's not discussed very often.
Okay, well, the headdress is different than what I think people normally think of as Indian headgear. That's very typical of Osage.
Yes, it's made of otter hide, and it was usually the tribal leaders that wore these.
I did a Focus on Art program with Brummett Eckelhawk, and he was painting a fellow here in town, Doug McIntosh,
Yes.
And he must be Osage because he was wearing that same type of headdress.
Well, sometimes the other tribes use that too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess that was my question.
But still, I think it symbolizes leadership.
Okay. The banding around the edge is very attractive. Where'd you get the idea for that? Or what does that represent?
That represents an Osage ribbon work applique design that's used on the blankets. I think they call that the double fork design.
Well, it's certainly a beautiful design. Paul, those are interesting colors. Are the colors that you're using in this painting typically Osage colors?
When you see these blanket designs like that, well, you see a lot of this same color here. Of course, they use other colors too, but then this is one of the main ones when they use this particular design. And it's put on red blankets or blue blankets.
Okay, that's really, really pretty, and it works out, I think, to make a wonderful, almost abstract quality to the painting. Let's talk a little bit about your technique before we leave this painting. Now, in the background there, looks like you have layers of watercolor, one over the other.
Yes.
And you're using a little, maybe a little opaque white in your watercolor so that it's not real transparent?
That's right.
I think sometimes our Focus on Art guests like to know how people do things.
All of the colors are mixed. In other words, it's not straight out of the tube. It's all has a little mixture to it to make it a color of its own.
Well, they really are nice. Well, before we go to the next painting, is there anything else you would like to add before we leave this one?
Well, there's with the buffalo and the eagle and elk were three of the main clan symbols in the tribe, and that's why I added these to this painting.
Those are wonderful naturalistic renditions. I assume that you are familiar with all of those animals firsthand.
Yes.
Let's talk about the next two paintings.
All right, the one on the right there is a ghost dance painting whereby the ghost dancers believed that if they kept dancing and singing, someday their ancestors and the buffalo would return. And that's what that represents. And the skull, buffalo skull up above, they always used that as a symbol of life. And when they sang and prayed, they used that skull to get through to the Creator in their supplications. And of course, their ghost dance designs on their costumes were typical ghost dance designs of the Plains tribes.
Well, this is a beautiful painting. I love the combination of the grays at the top to all the color at the bottom. Very beautiful use of color. And then the painting over on the left side.
That one there is called Riding with Grandfather. I used to ride on the back of my grandfather's horse with him, and that's why I thought of doing this. I had a lot of people comment on that.
I bet there are a few other grandsons in this area that brings back fond
sure,
memories too.
yeah.
Okay, well these are certainly lovely paintings. And Paul, your use of color is phenomenal. And I think you probably, really told us a lot about why your paintings are so successful when you said that you don't really use colors as they come out of the tube, that everything is mixed and it's just the special color for this particular painting. I think it is the color that separates your paintings from those that are good paintings to those that are particularly fine and artistic. The color's just beautiful. In the gallery that's up by the front door, there were a couple of paintings that I thought were particularly fine. I believe one was a horse and rider.
Yes, I think that was a painting of a scout. And it showed scenery and the way that the scouts dressed when they went out to patrol. And there's another painting in there of an Omaha chief showing again that they used the otter skin cap.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate your taking time out from your busy schedule to be with us here for Focus on Art. I know you'd rather be home painting this morning than here being on television, but I do appreciate your taking time to come by. I'm joined now by John West. John is primarily a beater, but he also makes flutes and fans. So John, welcome to Focus on Art.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I like to always begin and ask our guests to tell us just a little bit about who they are, where they live, and so forth.
Well, I live here in Tulsa, but I haven't been here. I'm not originally from here. I'm from western Oklahoma, around El Reno. I'm Calumet. It's close to El Reno, I guess, but I'm a member of the Cheyenne tribe, and I've been up here since about '74, since I got out of the service, I guess. And, you know, like the hills, like the country, and just managed to stay. Wound up marrying an Oto girl and divorced, and my son and I are still here, so this is home, you know.
Okay, great. Well, I'm from Oklahoma City. I don't
Yeah.
admit that often.
Yeah.
So, see, I know
that's
where
close to home,
Calumet.
yeah.
I know where Calumet
Yeah, you're
is.
probably one of the few people that do, you know.
That's right.
But, yeah.
Okay, well, I kind of like it over here in the hills
Yeah.
too. So it's a wonderful part of this
Good
state.
fishing, good fishing. It is, yeah. Well, what I do primarily is I've been doing beadwork for 12 years or so now, and I grew up around beaders. My aunt and my grandma were moccasin makers, you know, and Cheyennes are notorious for, you know, they're kind of famous for, you know, making moccasins and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But I grew up around the Native American church and am a ceremonial person, a sun dancer, and, you know, involved in ceremonials back home. And I had gotten involved and wanted to learn to make fans years ago, and there was a fellow that's deceased now that I had met early on, and I guess back in the 70s or so, and saw some fans that he made, and I asked him if he'd show me how to make those, and he said, yeah, I will. This fellow was primarily a fan maker, and like I say, I had gone to his house and made the trip down, you know, he lived out of town. And then wound up on his doorstep, and he said, well, he said, I don't know. He said, you know, he said, you young fellas, he said, you don't stick with it. He said, I don't think I can show you how to do this. And it really kind of made me mad, you know, and I went back to town, didn't know what else to do, but I knew the curator at Gilcrease Museum at that time, and he told me, he said, well, we've got some fans we're taking apart. He said, so if you'd like to come down and look at them, he said, they're in various stages of, you know, renewal or construction or whatever. And I went down and looked at them and kind of got an idea on how they were made at that point in time, you know. My granddad was a fan maker, but unfortunately he died in '68 or so without, you know, revealing any of that to the rest of us, you know. But I spent some time down at Gilcrease and figured out, you know, just the basics of it, and kind of went on from there. And the beadwork, I was shown by my aunt and different people, you know, as far as how to do the beadwork, what they call well, I call it a gourd stitch. A lot of people call it peyote stitch. And some examples of it here, like on this rattle here. This is an early piece, and it's made out of small beads called 16-aught beads, and this is what they call the peyote beadwork, or, you know, the gourd stitch beadwork, primarily because it's done on a dowel and done in kind of a circular motion like that to create the patterns or whatever. This is predates World War II. This was given to my son from his grandpa, and was given to his grandpa before he went off to battle overseas. And so this is kind of an heirloom piece that we keep in the family. But it's a good example of earlier beadwork and older type beadwork here. This the fans in the old days were really crude. This particular fan here is what they call a doctoring fan that belonged to my great-granddad, and it's made out of what they call yellowhammer or flicker feathers. And as you can see, there's no beadwork on it. It does have the fringe, the rolled fringe, but it's just really crude, and the feathers are what they call loose feathers. There's probably about 60 or 70 of them, and they're in pretty bad shape. It's an old fan, like I say, but this was kind of how they were made early on. They were just really crude, maybe put on a dowel or something like that. And the feathers, these particular feathers here, are wrapped in sinew, which anymore they're made out of buckskin or whatever. But as you can see, it's an old fan, and it doesn't have any beadwork on it. This fan here was my grandpa's ceremonial fan, and it's an eagle fan. But my granddad didn't use a lot of beadwork on his fans, and when I got a hold of this one, I thought, well, it's come into my possession now. I'm going to put some beadwork on it, and it's done on a dowel, which is a lot of ceremonial people that use these fans have what they call a break-apart dowel, which the handles come off or whatever. They use shotgun rods and different things for that. And I went ahead and had the beadwork put on this, and it's a 16-aught beadwork, which is kind of complements some of the feather work, the colors and the plumes and stuff like that. But the 16-aught beads were used back earlier on in the 30s and the 40s or whatever, prior to I guess the influence of what they call Czechoslovakian cut beads, which have come in now, which is an example of that would be like this fan here. And this is one that I've recently made, and you can tell from the glitter on the beads themselves. This is what a lot of people use right now, because it gives off a lot of glitz, and people like it for the costuming and stuff like that. But this is more or less a contemporary version of some of the older pieces that are carried on here. And this is done again in 13-aught beads, which are a little bit bigger than the 16s and a lot easier to work with.
John, does the number 60 in the bead size have any particular meaning, or are there 60 in an inch or something like that?
No.
60 is just a size 60 bead simply means that it's smaller than a size 30 bead. There's not a particular relationship.
It's just
proportional
just
thing.
a proportional thing, more or less.
Okay, I had one question too. Did you do the beadwork
Yeah.
on the fan of your grandfather?
No, well, on
The
my grandfather's fan, yeah. On these pieces here. Now on the gourd, it was done by an Oto man, and I'm not sure what his name was, but it was given to my son's granddad, Ben Arkakita, and we've had that, and it's kind of like I say, it's an heirloom piece that'll it's functional still, which means that my son can use it should he choose to do that or whatever. But it's still a piece that, like I say, will be with us for quite a while. And these fans here, kind of give you an example. This is just some different types of contemporary beadwork. These feathers are feathers that you can sell. You will get penalized for you can't sell eagle feathers or anything like that. But these are like macaw feathers. These are turkey feathers here, and I've just gone ahead and constructed them mainly for people that want to use them for dance fans or different things like that. I do a lot of ceremonial fans for folks. I have a permit which allows me to work with eagle feathers and stuff like that, but we don't, you just don't get compensated for them because it's against the law to do that kind of stuff. And a lot of people that, unfortunately have been in trouble in this state for, making fans and selling them with eagle feathers and stuff like that. So you gotta, you just try to be mindful of, of the law and work within its constraints more or less.
Well, for those of us that are not particularly patient, when I look at one of those fans and that beadwork, it looks to me like it is a tremendously tedious task that you're doing. Tell us about the actual construction of beadwork, and I assume it has to be a very time-consuming craft form.
It takes a lot of time. You just have to, if you work another job or whatever, it takes quite a bit of time to set them up. A fan like this, like what I call a flat fan. Now there's two different styles here. They're both flat fans, but if you can notice this, each one of these quills here are beaded, and to match the beadwork on the handle itself. Now this one doesn't. The quills aren't beaded or anything. They're just set into the handle like that. But there's also some thread work on these here, and a little bit of feather work. This is a little more fancier fan, I guess, than this one here in terms of time and all that, because each one of these has to be, like I say, beaded individually. There's about an hour and a half worth of beadwork on each one of these quills here, And in the handle itself, you might have a good, I don't know, 20 some hours and beading it, you know, because those beads, I try to tell people, they go on one at a time. You
Right.
know, it's not like you have a machine and just set the design and it cranks it out. But it takes a long time, and if you have another job or something that you do, you might wind up taking a week or 2 weeks to get these done. It just depends on your schedule and stuff.
In addition to making fans, you also make flutes, so let's take a minute and look at your flutes.
Yeah, that's another story. I did the man that I did meet when I started making these flutes was a fellow named Woodrow Haney, who's a Creek Seminole artist that lives here in Glenpool. And I met him in '74 at the symposium in Tahlequah, and he had a table set up, and he had some plain redwood flutes out. And I asked him at that point, I said, you know, went by and talked to him. I said, yeah, I'd like to get one of those flutes. I figured they were $20, $25, something like that, you know. And I said, yeah, I'll take 2 of them, you know, write me out a bill of sale. So he did. He wrote it up and gave me the slip and said, okay, that'll be $400. Whoa. I said, well, I don't have that. He said, well, they're $200 a piece. I said, well, maybe, you know, can I come by your shop sometime? And he said, yeah, come on by. So it was a few months before I got around there, but I eventually did. And I made flutes that were similar to his, which were just the basic redwood flutes. They didn't have anything on them as far as the effigy was usually a bird or something like that. They were real nice flutes. But I have since started working on a little fancier versions. I make mine now primarily out of hardwood, you know, and exotic hardwoods. I've got 3 examples here. This one here is made out of Paduke wood, which is a hardwood. It's a South American wood. All the finishes that I put on them are clear acrylic after I sand them down, which is, you know, to kind of maintain the naturalness of the wood itself, you know. But this one is, like I say, it's a kind of a South American wood. I lathe turn them now. I have a lathe that I put them on and turn them, you know, to put my designs on. But I also, you know, try to put a little bit of beadwork on them, you know. And I've gotten into making stands, as you can see from this creation here. These 2 belong to an individual, and they also have stands that go with them. I didn't bring them today, but it'll kind of give you a different, you know, idea of the wood. You know, since I've been working in wood, I also do cabinet work by trade. I really have, you know, developed a love for the different, you know, textures of different hardwoods in particular, and they have a little bit of a different sound to them than the redwoods do. This piece here is walnut, and it's American, what they call American black walnut, and it's it's a big one. But like I say, it has the beadwork on it, and I beaded some macaw feathers down here. She wanted a little bit of carving. I don't know if you can see it or not. I have a low relief design. This is a buffalo effigy, and I have a low relief design carving in here of a herd of buffalo going down the wind tunnel here. And this buffalo here, I made it out of German silver or whatever as the effigy, which is what, you know, it depends on what folks want. If you know, I try to, if it's not too impossible, you know, try to accommodate them. But this is walnut, which is a little bit easier to work than the Paduke. The Paduke is a little tougher. This one here is kind of a fancy rig here. This is made out of Philippine mahogany, and the stand itself is made out of Philippine mahogany. The base is made out of laminate. But one thing that I found out with this wood here is that it's real toxic, and I didn't really, you know, discover that until I started working on it.
Oh,
and the
okay.
dust is just, it'll really make you sick if you're not careful with it. But I like the grain in it, you know.
Really,
There's
it's
a really,
gorgeous.
you can really, you know, see it has a different texture to it. But I kind of got carried away on this one. Like I say, I did some beadwork on it, and I fixed up a little bag and stuff like that. And I rarely do that, but because it's real time consuming. But I just, there are some of them that are just, you know, plain Jane models, and then some of them, you know, if you get the time and if people order them like that, you just try to accommodate them. But I really like, if I had my preference in wood, I'd prefer working with this one here, even though it's kind of hard to work.
John, you mentioned that Woodrow Haney's flutes are redwood. Now, is that the traditional material for Indian flutes?
Well, I don't think so. They, you know, redwood, of course, is indigenous to California. Now, I had seen some earlier flutes, again, when I was at Gilcrease, that were in various stages of repair or whatever. And one that I can remember was an Osage flute that was made out of ash. Ash had the pith in it, and of course ash wood is what they used to make the pipe stems with too. Now this particular flute that was made out of the ash, kind of show you an example here. All these flutes are divided into 2 halves, and even the flutes I make, you know, each is a 2-piece that you core out the center, you know, then put them together. And because of the modern technology we have today, the woods that I put together, I fill with a wood glue and then clamp them together and let them sit overnight before
Okay.
turning them. Now, in the Osage flute that I saw that was made out of ash, again had the two pieces on it. But inside here, as kind of a sealant, they had used beeswax, you know, along the seams, you know, to keep the air in, keep it from escaping. And these thongs that you see here, the one in particular had thongs all the way down on it that were tied on there to hold it in place and keep it together. And that was kind of some of the earlier construction. But I think probably they used woods that had a pith in them, you know, that they could clean out, core out real well. And I've even seen some that were made out of cane, you know, river cane and like that.
All right, so that depending on where a particular tribe was located, the flutes would be the
Yeah,
materials that
yeah.
were indigenous
Yeah,
to that area. Okay. I just, from your earlier comment, I thought maybe all tribes imported flute wood
Oh, yeah.
from the West
Yeah,
Coast or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah, well yeah, that's kind of a misnomer, I guess. But I know when I was living out in Albuquerque, I'd met some Acoma flute makers that made theirs out of cottonwood, which is, you know, cottonwood. They're kind of scarce on trees out that way, so they you know, use the cottonwood or whatever. And it's kind of a softer wood, and it's pliable and easy to carve. And they had some pretty good sounds to them too. They again used a lot of cane, you know, river cane stuff like that. But I've always been, like I say, I've done cabinet work and I do laminate work, you know, kind of as another trade. And I've always been interested in the grains of wood and the textures and stuff like that.
well, John, they're just beautiful, and each one an individual work of art. We certainly do appreciate your taking time from your busy schedule to be here today, and
Thank you. I appreciate being on your program.
all your information about flutes and fans. For those of you at home, we appreciate your being with us as always. And until next time, this is your host, Barbara Cohen-Hour, wishing you a most pleasant good evening.